Hello, welcome to www.everydayhdr.com. My name is Blake Rudis, and today I want to talk about 32-bit processing in Photomatix Pro 4.2, but not with Lightroom like many are used to, but with Adobe Camera Raw. There's some of us out there that don't really use Lightroom like myself that want 32-bit processing with Photomatix, and it's just as easy to do as 32-bit processing in Photoshop CS6. If you follow along weekly, I showed that tutorial last week on my workflow with Photoshop 32-bit. Now I'm going to show you Photomatix 32-bit. So the first thing I'm going to do, I've got Photomatix Pro 4.2 opened up right here. I've opened up my folder that I want to drag and drop into Photomatix. It's these files right here, so I'm going to go ahead and click them and drag them in. 5 exposures. I have a 0 exposure value layer. I have a +1, +2, -1, -2. Now, here, I usually have this unclicked if I'm going to be tone mapping, but we're not going to be tone mapping here. We're going to be doing 32-bit. So go ahead and press OK. As usual, I want to align source images by matching features. I did have this on a tripod, so I could put it on horizontal and vertical shifts, but just to be on the safe side, I'm going to put matching features. It takes a little bit longer. It's usually recommended for handheld shots, but I'll go ahead and keep it. In case there was any ghosting, I'll go ahead and have that removed. Have it do it automatically because it wasn't a very windy day. And let's go ahead and throw reduce chromatic aberrations on. I don't want to reduce any noise right now though. Press OK. So it's going to compile these images into a 32-bit RAW. From there, we're going to take a 32-bit TIFF. From there, we're going to take that 32-bit TIFF into Adobe Camera Raw, or what I like to call ACR. So if you hear me refer to it as ACR, that's Adobe Camera Raw. It's going to be the same basic concept that I did last week. 32-bit turned into a 16-bit, and then that 16-bit brought through a Camera Raw as well, and then processed from there. It's kind of a weighted process that I do, but I like my outcome in the end, and that's all it comes down to in the end. Is my way the right way to do it? No. It's just the way I do it, and that's what I'm showing you. Just to give you a little bit of insight on how other people are doing it. Doesn't necessarily mean that my way is the highway, or my way or the highway, however that phrase goes. So you see here we have our intermediary 32-bit file. I'm going to go ahead, instead of going to tone mapping like I know I would, I'm going to go to File and then go to Save As. Now I'm going to save this as 32-bit TIFF into my desktop, and I'm going to put it in my experiments folder because that's where I throw all of my tutorial based stuff. I'm going to go ahead and replace it, that's fine. And then I'm going to close Photomatix. We're done in Photomatix. So now in the experiment section, I've got this 32-bit TIFF somewhere floating around here. Here it is. And you see it looks pretty ugly right now. And that's fine, because what Adobe Camera Raw is doing right now is it's reading the exposure value for this set to 0. So at 0, there's so much range in this photo. If we go all the way to the right, we have white. If we go all the way to the left, we have near black. So there's so much range in this photo that the mid-range for this is actually about right there. So we're going to go ahead and drop the exposure until we have a workable image. That looks about good. Then I'm going to go ahead and start tweaking this like I would a normal HDR file, or dynamic range exploitation, I guess, in Adobe Camera Raw. And that's to immediately drop the highlights to 0 to see how that looks, or -100, and then increase the shadows to see how that looks. And this is typical of basically making a flat 32-bit image. I don't want it to have too much contrast or too much going on right now, because I'm going to do that in post-processing. So you can go ahead and just make this pretty flat. I mean, you want to recover some blacks and whites in here, but for the most part, it's going to be a flattened image. And increase the clarity on this, because that's going to give us our HDR texture, the clarity. What I like to look at as clarity is it works hand in hand with the contrast adjustment. It's like contrast in the details. It heightens the detail contrast. Look at how the details start to get actually a lot less here, and then as they increase, it's really just increasing that white to black contrast in the detail. So we'll go ahead and boost that up a little bit. Another thing I'm going to want to do here is straighten this out. So I'm going to go to my strongest vertical, which is going to be this door because that is the strongest vertical in the image. I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and you can look, oh, there's me holding my tripod and my, oh, hi Blake. We're going to go ahead and just, sorry, I get sidetracked easily. And then press enter to resize that. Okay, oops, what happened there? I told you to do something. Yep, it didn't want to listen. Okay, let's do that again. Sometimes things go your way in this tutorial, and other times they don't. Alright. I like it. It works for me. Okay, now I'm going to open this image. And then we're going to go to Image Mode and change this to 16-bit. So we went from 32-bit, now back to 16-bit, going down to 16-bit. Now we're going to go to Save As. We're going to save this as a TIFF. So if you watched my tutorial last week, you're going to see that a lot of things are very similar to what I do between, I'm going to say this is 16-bit TIFF 2 or 1 because I already have another one in there. A lot of this is very similar to what I do in Photoshop. So I'm going to go, what I need to do first is go ahead and exit out of here and then open up my experiments folder and go to that 16-bit TIFF 1. Okay. Now, we're going to do similar things here. Increase that highlights, see what happens. I don't really like how drastic that's getting, so I'm going to be kind of conservative with my highlights here. Kind of conservative with my shadows because I don't like how much it's opening in that window. I mean, it doesn't really look that natural. I mean, I like how that window was pretty dark to begin with, so we'll go ahead and leave that the way it is there. Let's play with our whites and our darks here. If you press the U in the I key, you get these little blinkies here. That's what they call them, I guess, in the industry, the blinkies. If you increase your whites too much or your highlights too much, you're going to start seeing these areas of really blown out areas. It's good to have a little bit there. A little bit to grab onto is good, but too much and you blow out the image. So the same thing with the black point. We want some black in this photo because a good photo has white and has black in it. So we'll go ahead and leave that. Let's drop it a little bit more, get a little bit less black in there, because you don't want those areas to be completely destroyed. I mean, you definitely want black areas, but look at what happens when we go all the way down. It starts to get nasty. So before it gets nasty, put it in check. And then the clarity slider, we'll go ahead and boost that a little bit just to give it that more dynamic range within the defined details, as we said before. And you can increase the vibrance if that's your thing, but I don't really like my stuff to be too vibrant, especially because this wasn't a very vibrant day. So I'm going to go and press Open Image. Now, my workflow on this is going to be trying to recover areas that aren't right. There's blue in an area that should be black. I have a flat image. That's what my goal was. My goal was to be flat. It was to have flat all around so that I could do more with it in post-processing later. So one of the first things I do is a series of curves adjustments that I like to call the works. I've done a similar tutorial on this before but never showed it as my action. But I just go ahead and press play, and it does some recovery for me. It recovers my midtones, my shadows, and it does some stuff with my highlights. I don't necessarily like what it did to my shadows here. It made them a little too strong. Essentially what this is, it's a curves adjustment layer with a mask on it. You see this shadow mask right here. That is masked just for the shadow areas. This is masked just for the midtones. This is masked just for the highlights, and that's masked for the highlights as well. It's two different highlights adjustments. That's a whole another tutorial that I will link in the description of this post. So I'm going to drop the shadows down a little bit. And then I want to start playing with my saturation. I've got red bricks here that don't look red. I've got a blue sign that should be a black sign. So that tells me right away I should be going into the hue saturation adjustment and modifying my blues. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the lightness of my blues. You see immediately I'm starting to recover black in an area that should be black. But what I'm also doing when I do that is I'm losing some of the blue in the windows and the door and those areas there. That's not that big of a deal because all I have to do is click on the hue saturation mask that's right here and black, make sure my opacity is set to 100%, and just paint those areas that I want to recover and leave the rest black. That should be black, right? So next thing I want to do is recover some of my reds. Now I've already done one hue saturation adjustment. If you want to, you can rename this by just double clicking on the letters and put blue to black there. That way you know. I have a pretty strong layer control, so I usually don't do that, but let's go to reds. Now I'm going to modify the reds. They don't really look too red right now. Let me get my zoom tool here. They don't look like red bricks. They look kind of interesting. So I'm going to modify the hue and see what the hue will do by adding a little bit to the hue. That's definitely a brick of a different color. That's a Midwest joke. Kansas, yeah, okay. So by +5, I started to bring some red back into those bricks. But what I have going on here is some weird brick color. I'm not sure what's going on with that. So let's start looking around at our colors. Let's go to magenta and see if that's in the magentas. Yep, that exists in the magenta layer. I just got lucky with that because I said red, what's close to red, what's close to red is magenta. So let's see if we can recover some of that too. So now by doing that, we've turned our red bricks red and our magenta bricks to a lighter red brick. So that looks pretty good. I'm liking what's going on here, other than there's some orange going on over here, and that's not a big deal. Again, we can just go to our brush tool, press the left bracket key, B for brush tool, left bracket key. If you need to restore your default palette here, you can press D to restore the defaults, and then X to switch back and forth between them. Now, with it set to black, I can go ahead and paint out those areas to get rid of those orange looking bricks. That was the only thing that was kind of wrong with that. Let's look at what happened to the door. And our door looks actually more red now too. So I like what's going on with that as well. So it looks like we have something pretty strong here. What I really think this image needs is maybe I don't know, let's try a high pass sharpen layer, just to kind of bring some things back. So what I did was I pressed Control J on the background, Control J, and I moved that up to the top. I'm going to delete that one because I don't need two of them. And I'm going to go and set this to soft light. And then I'm going to filter and go to other and go to high pass. And let's make it something around like 6 or 7. You can see what's happening here. You know, depending on the look and the feel that you want in this image, you can do whatever you want with your high pass. I like to keep it conservative between 5 and 8. And if we take this off of soft light and go to normal, you can see that there's some color right here in our high pass layer. So if I press Control Shift U or Command Shift U on the Mac, that's going to turn, it's going to desaturate that layer. So I'm getting my high pass without any residual saturation in that high pass. Now if that high pass ends up being too strong, like it looks like it kind of is, I can just go ahead and drop that opacity down to about 50%, 60%. We'll leave it at that. Now one more thing I think this image is great for is these are all my actions. I have a lot of actions, but it would be great to have a vignette around this one to really just kind of pull you into this and focus you around it a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and press play on the box vignette in the Tidbits of Awesomeness action that is for sale on everydayhdr.com. Recently reduced price to $20 for the action package. Got to go ahead and throw that plug out there for me. Now, I like the vignette. I like what it's done to this side over here and this side over here, but what I don't like is that it's not really inviting you to the front door anymore. And that's kind of what I want, you know? So there's nothing wrong with doing a selective vignette. I already have the vignette there. I can throw a mask on it and then press B brush tool, have it set to black, and paint those areas out that I want to come back. So I can re-invite you into the front door of the, I guess this is a salon or something, in Weston, Missouri. Alright, now the one last thing I think this could use, and I usually end most of my post-processing with a dodge and burn layer. In my last tutorial, I showed dodging and burning with a 50% gray with a black brush and a white brush. It can be done just as well with a dodge and burn layer using the dodge and burn tool. So here's my dodge and burn layer. I'm just going to go ahead and press play on this action. It's a 50% gray layer set to overlay. And if you're reading here, this is an action it's also in the Tidbits of Awesomeness package. With the dodge tool selected, which it's selected right now, you can start painting in the area that you'd like to dodge an area out. If you want to switch on the fly, you can hold Alt or Option for the Mac while using the dodge tool to go vice versa. So I'll show you how that works. So let's go ahead and continue. Okay, so right now it's set to dodge. If there's any areas in here I want to dodge, I can go ahead and do so. Like maybe I want to bring some of this area back in here, make that a little bit more white. I'm dodging those areas out right now, and I'm just painting really slow with my Wacom tablet. Wacom, I never know how they pronounce that. Just to bring some of those white areas back in to make that look like a little bit more of a pristine area. Maybe I'll pull some of this area back in too. Now, if I want to switch to the dodge tool, I just press Alt, and that will immediately switch me into the dodge tool. So for the dodge tool, I'm going to dodge out areas that should be black. And these areas look like they need to be black, so I'll bring those areas back too. Now, and I mentioned in my last tutorial about the 32-bit processing is that HDR is great for really bringing out tones in an image. But what it does sometimes is it pushes our lights and our darks too far away from us, and we lose all sight of black and white, or what should be black and white. And then you've lost your shadows. You've lost a lot of that detail and that stuff that should be there. It was there in the original picture when you took the picture. It should be there in your final image too. So that's one of the downfalls of HDR. So if we look at what we did here, we added some black and some white to this. If we set this to normal, we can see all the areas that I painted in with my dodging and burning. Now, I'm going to go ahead and set that back to overlay. What is the difference between tone mapping and HDR? This would be, I guess, considered tone mapping too, because it is a 32-bit, but it's not to the extreme as tone mapping. Let's go ahead and look at the tone mapped version of this. I went a little bit crazy with it, and I didn't think I went crazy with it because that's what I was doing when I was tone mapping it. But now that I look at it, I went a little too crazy with this one. And this one I think looks a lot better. I kind of like this at the time, but there's all kinds of mess with it. I wasn't done post-processing. I obviously haven't added any dodging and burning to this one. But, there's just slight differences between, actually large differences between the 32-bit processing and the tone mapping process. And it really comes down to a matter of personal preference. I like both, and I use both interchangeably. I just wanted to show you the difference between the two. So that was a 32-bit workflow with Photomatix and Photoshop, Adobe Camera Raw, as opposed to the traditional and what seems to be popular these days, 32-bit Photomatix and Lightroom. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. Leave feedback if you did. If you have any suggestions for tutorials, I'll go ahead and take those as well. I hope you enjoyed this. Have a great weekend.